You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
All right, Ryan, Jamal, we are here to talk about the Week 9 matchup between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Atlanta Falcons. There's a lot of ways we can go here. We can talk about the expectations for both of these teams coming in and where they are now compared to those expectations. Injuries have become a storyline of late for both of these squads. But let's just start here. I want to ask you guys, is this going to go as poorly for the Falcons as their last AFC matchup did against Cincinnati? I mean, how scared should Falcons fans be for this Chargers team, Jamal?
Well, I think, it's an interesting question. The Chargers are dealing with a lot going into this matchup, specifically on the injury side. When you look at not having their top two receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, reports this week are that Keenan Allen hasn't really responded to the hamstring recovery over the course of the bye that folks would like. I have my doubts of whether or not he's going to play. You're down your two best wide receivers, the injuries to the offensive line, the injuries to the Joey Bosa's and the JC Jacksons of the world. The Chargers come into this game not only banged up physically, but they come in banged up from a psyche perspective. And so I actually am not sure what Chargers team is going to make that flight to Atlanta in this game. And so I think the Falcons should be concerned that if the Chargers have their fastball, they are one of the most talented teams in the AFC. But Chargers fans should be concerned about if they can get their fastball. And the only thing that's been consistent about the Chargers this season has been their inconsistency. One game, they're great on the ground with Austin Ekeler and Joshua Kelley. Another game, it's a complete disappearing act. One game, you feel like you have a lot of confidence in the Gerald Everetts of the world. In the next game, there's a disappearing act. So, when you couple that with Justin Herbert's health and where he is in terms of his ribs, in terms of the beating that he's been taking the last couple of weeks, you just don't know what you're going to get. And I think that's what makes this matchup very compelling, is I think you have two teams whose ceilings, when they're really on, can be very high, but the ebbs and flows of the season has really turned each team into a bit of a daytime soap opera.
Ryan, do you share Jamal's concerns about the, which team will show up for Los Angeles? And certainly a kickoff early on the East Coast. I mean, that is a big factor when you're talking about a team's readiness, kind of will they show up, all of that. So is that a concern for you as well?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, me and Jamal coast and we try to disagree with each other's, but I feel like we just agree on a lot of the same things because I don't know, we just do, I guess.
The groupthink is real. It really is.
Yeah, it really is. But with this team, it's so true. And Will, first of all, thanks again for doing this with us. I had a blast with you talking Falcons Rams earlier in the year. So glad we were able to get back on and do some more LA talk on your stuff and having you on our show as well. But and this is going to come out weird, and it's definitely not meant disrespectful to the Falcons because I think it's been such a fun, surprising season for that Falcons team, and obviously covering the team. But I would feel much better if the Chargers were playing like the Chiefs this week or the Bills this week, just because for some reason this year they've played up to their competition more so. And when they play the, again, not lesser team in the Falcons, they have pretty much the same record, but a team maybe of less talent or less caliber, they tend to not show up and get completely out coached and just something goes awry. And especially with the Falcons being such a strong running team and whatnot, and what they're really leaning into with the Arthur Smith system, how does that match up against this Chargers defense? So echoing what Jamal said, yeah, definitely a concern. Coming off the bye helps for sure, but there's really not getting, unfortunately, a lot of these guys back yet. They're getting them back later in the season, but not just right after this bye. So they're going to be a very banged up team heading to Atlanta. And you mentioned it, that 10 a.m. kickoff time. West Coast teams never tend to play well at that early window on the East Coast. So that's definitely a real factor too.
I actually have a theory on kind of what you just mentioned about they would probably get up a little bit more for a Chiefs game, a Bills game, these better teams in the NFL. And I think that as I was looking at the Chargers and looking at their statistics and looking at how they've played and kind of trying to think of all the storylines that I remembered about the Chargers throughout the offseason and all of that stuff, they're a team that's built for the AFC West. They're a team that's built for the Chiefs. They're a team that's, built more for the Bengals. They're a team that's kind of going to play, Brandon Staley made that move to the cover 2 kind of really popular, I think, last year. And then watching them offensively, their short passing game is such an extension of their run game that I almost feel like they expected everybody to start playing them the way that they're playing Kansas City. And they're anticipating so much deep coverage that I don't even feel like they're taking as many deep shots as they have been in the past. Am I reading that correctly? And so when you play a team like Atlanta or a lesser team or Seattle or somebody like that who doesn't have the juggernaut passing game that we kind of associate with the best teams in the league, these teams run the ball well. And LA has not done a good job. In fact, they've done the worst job on a per play basis against the run this season. Like, is that the right read on this team, that they're kind of built more for a passing oriented game, Ryan, as opposed to like a ground and pound game that Seattle wants to play, that Cleveland wants to play, and certainly Atlanta wants to play?
Well, here's the concerning thing, Will, and you're spot on, but they tackled the offseason to become a team that could stop the run. Yes, they signed J.C. Jackson, they signed Bryce Callahan. They got more reinforcements in the secondary as well. Obviously, JC has not played great, and then now he's out for the season, but Bryce Callahan has been tremendous.
He's been great.
Yeah, he's been great. But the signings of Sebastian Joseph Day, of Austin Johnson, and others, the drafting of Otito Ogbonnia out of UCLA, they've added all these reinforcements to the middle of their line to, improve what was such a weakness last year. And I'll let Jamal touch on this more too. But the unfortunate thing is, from an overall, I know you just mentioned that great stat on a per play basis, but when you actually look at it play by play basis, they actually have really improved, but they seem every game to give up a 50-yard plus run. And that's what just blows that stat away. And then it's like when you average things out, then it bumps that number up. But overall, they've done better. Now, they weren't great against Seattle in their last game with Kenneth Walker and whatnot, but that second half against Cleveland, they only allowed 32 yards or so to Nick Chubb. They really tightened things up. So it's just, they need to get, like Jamal mentioned earlier, it's consistently inconsistent, and they need to flip that and consistently play to what they've actually been constructed to be, which is what they were this offseason, was to stop the run. So, but if Jamal wants to add on to that as well.
Yeah, it's a great point, Will. And, just to piggyback off of what Ryan is saying, this is only the third game of the season for the Chargers where they're going to play a team that's 500 or above. And they're 0-2. They lost the game to the Chiefs that they probably should have won. There were some questionable calls there. And then just, got the doors blown off them against the Seahawks at home. So seeing how they respond here, I think if there's a word that I can describe the Chargers this year in terms of schematically the things that you're saying, is they were built for patience, but they have not committed to patience. And when you look at teams that are very patient and methodical in their offensive approach, whether that is the Seahawks, whether that is the Jaguars when they came in early in the season, whether that is the Browns, whether that was even the Texans to a certain extent of that game, you find that the Chargers do things impatiently to try and create separation and make some questionable decisions, whether that's going for it on a fourth down on their side of the field, or taking a shot out of character after, knowing that what the defense is willing to give them underneath, or staying committed to that running game, even if the first handful of carries isn't generating a lot of yardage. It just seems that the Chargers go into a game saying, we are going to play X style. And Ryan alluded to this a couple of weeks ago on our show. It doesn't really matter what the other team is doing. We're going to do X in terms of what we've prepared for. Now, whether that team matches up well with X or they don't, so be it. We're just going to go in there and play a certain way. And that ability to stay patient and that ability to make in-game adjustments, I think, has been the biggest detriment to their season so far.
Yeah, it's almost like the Zach Wilson quote when he said, I basically got bored out there for the way that he was throwing the ball the other day because teams are just making him play a patient form of football. It's like that quote just as an organization. Is that what it's been like, Jamal?
Absolutely, Will. And I think this team, is doing the right things from time to time, but it just feels like they lose that patience and they want to, put Herbert in some dangerous situations, even though he's not 100% healthy. They want to take some random shots down the field. They want to kind of get their weapons involved, even on certain games where they're down wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 on the depth chart. They're just not playing to their personnel. They're not willing to sort of grind. The Chargers, for them to be able to make that next step, they have to be more than just this sort of vanilla sideshow that's entertaining. They have to have that sort of championship moxie, willing to sort of grind out some victories. And that's something we haven't seen yet. They got grinded into the ground by the Seahawks and the Jaguars and should have sort of lost the game against Cleveland. They sort of gift wrapped that game to Cleveland. So, they were up early for that Chiefs game, and we sort of considered them a 2-0 team, even though they were 1-1, but they just haven't come back to that. To your point, Will, I think sometimes that focus is so much on one team, you forget you have a schedule to play. An NBA analogy a couple of years ago was when Daryl Morey and the Houston Rockets were just so obsessed with the Warriors and matched up their personnel to the Warriors that year after, they just weren't as good because they forgot, well, actually there's 29, 30 other teams that we have to deal with. Yeah. It's not just the Warriors.
Yeah, it's like you made. Sorry, go ahead, Ren.
No, I was just gonna say last point on that, and looking specifically just at the defense again, Will. Brandon, I love Brandon. We both like Brandon Staley a lot. I love Brandon Staley. I loved what he did with the Rams before he was hired by the Chargers, and his defense in general is built to do that effect to the offense, make the offense get bored and force something at some point that's going to either result in a turnover or a turnover on downs or a weird coaching call because the coach wants to push the field. That's what his defense is built on. And it's almost like the defensive players, though, are not adhering to that, like Jamal was saying, committing, and then they're getting sloppy. They're making fundamental errors. A lot of these big runs that we're seeing, because they're not really giving up a ton deep through the air. There has been some, but that hasn't been their bugaboo. The big thing has been the big gashing runs. And a lot of it's either, over pursuing or Derwin James, the best safety in football, just flat out missing an open field tackle, stuff like that. So it's just the little things that this defense is built on, whether it's buy-in, whether it's boredom, whatever it may be, the defense just hasn't fully committed to it. And so they're kind of their own Achilles heel of what they're trying to make offenses do.
Yeah. I mean, this is such a fascinating matchup to me because of these two identities of these teams, because, Atlanta, and one of the things that I think Arthur Smith identified, and it was something that he was doing even back in Tennessee, but that was a little bit personnel driven with Derrick Henry, is most defenses across the league right now, first and foremost, are worried about the pass. They're worried about defending the pass because most of the offenses are kind of pass first offenses. So they're already a little bit less focused on the run. So Arthur Smith has said, we're going to make that our primary focus, and we're going to run it against you until you are forced to move out of a situation where you have an advantage against the pass, and you're going to move into the box. And that's when we're going to try to strike against you. And so, Ryan, as I look at this matchup and I look at Brandon Staley and we talk about his defense in cover 2 and kind of putting that 10 up and not letting anything deep, but you mirror that with the lack of patience, with, kind of getting antsy as the game goes along. Arthur Smith has proven time and again this season, he's never going to get bored running the football against you. In fact, he kind of runs the football to a detriment. When he's down 3 touchdowns and he should probably start throwing the football, he's going to just keep running it. So is that the biggest concern for the Chargers, is that not only are the Falcons effective running it, but then you counter it and then they start hitting the top over you? Or do you think they're just going to stay in too high the whole time and Atlanta's just going to be able to run the ball?
No, it's a huge concern, and it's why this matchup favors Atlanta. But the key will be adjustments, because as I mentioned with the Cleveland game, that favors Cleveland absolutely too. And the Chargers did make adjustments in that second half and brought
they've got the bye week
down in the box, got the bye week. So that's what we'll see. And but yeah, that's definitely not what this defense. I mean, it's what they want, but you also need the playmakers in order to do it. And not to just make this about comparing to Brandon Staley and his Rams, but when you look at this Rams team, this Chargers team doesn't have Aaron Donald on the defensive line. So that makes up for a lot against the run. And if you remember that playoff game where they lost to the Packers, Aaron Donald was banged up, wasn't 100%, didn't play the whole game. And the Packers just dinked and dunked and ran down the Rams' throat in that game. And so that's what teams have been able to do against the Chargers, even with the reinforcements they've got. But you lose Joey Bosa. They're banged up a little bit at linebacker. They just lost Chris Rumph, who was their third edge guy. And so, yeah, this matchup's going to be interesting to see how quickly Staley will move out of that high 2 safety look and start bringing guys like Derwin James into the box, which he's going to, I think, have to do pretty early on.
Jamal, I want to flip over to the offense now for the Chargers. And part of what I was looking at after watching a couple of Chargers games, I just felt like a lot of checkdowns to Ekeler, a lot of short yardage stuff. And again, part of that can be by design. Sometimes it looks like it is by design. But then I went and looked at, the air yards per pass, and Justin Herbert is 32nd among 35 qualifying quarterbacks for this stat with 6.2 air yards per attempt. Is that more the result of injuries at receiver? Is that more the result of Justin Herbert's own injury? Or is that kind of by design with the offense this year?
Yeah, Will, it's a staggering statistic, isn't it? When you consider Justin Herbert in the landscape of NFL arm strength hierarchy.
Yeah.
He's probably, arguably at the top, or certainly top 3 in terms of arm talent of anyone in the league today. So to see a 6.2, yards per attempt, essentially, and seeing how that's playing out, I think there's a couple things here, Will. One is the injuries to the receivers can't be overstated. Losing your number 1 guy second half of week 1 in terms of Keenan Allen has been absolutely significant for this team. Mike Williams is a tremendous number 2 wide receiver, but as Ryan and I have also alluded to, he can be inconsistent at times in terms of sloppiness with his, route running ability and just kind of the precision and how he gets open. Sometimes he sort of overly tries to rely on his body to make contested catches, and that works and that doesn't work sometimes. So I think there's been a lack of connectivity with Herbert and his receivers. Second, I think his own injury is very significant. I think the rib cartilage injury has really impacted him in a lot of ways. And you can see it in a couple of different areas, Will. One is obviously kind of the reluctance to air it out. But second, you can even look at it in terms of his mechanics, in how he is struggling to follow through on even some of those deep out routes, some of those 15 to 25 yard balls that, he's got laser beam like arm talent to make. Yeah. And so many of those balls have either been in the dirt or sailed over a guy's head. And again, that's directly attributed to follow through and being able to manage that pain. And the third area where it's really emerged is, if you look at a lot of Chargers games, the number of batted balls at the line of scrimmage. The Chargers are right now averaging probably between 4 and 6 of Herbert's passes a game seem to get tipped at the line of scrimmage, because he's in kind of 3-quarter formation and, really trying to compensate for those ribs. So you're seeing those characteristics materialize in other ways. And I think it's just made him more reluctant to really air it out and hang in the pocket as well, because of the injuries to the offensive line. Now, folks like Salyer have done a tremendous job in terms of replacing temporarily a Rashawn Slater. But I think Herbert still necessarily may not have 100% confidence in his offensive line, 100% confidence in his own physical abilities, nor 100% confidence in his receiving core right now. And I think all 3 of those characteristics are attributing to this.
I know that he's, obviously played with the injury, Ryan, but has there been any word coming out of the bye week? Is he healthier than he's been all season? Any headlines like that? Or, is this something that he's just going to deal with throughout the rest of the year, and it's kind of just going to be what it's going to be?
So Jamal and I kind of chuckled about this on our last show, because going into the Seattle game, he was taken off the injury report, which leads you to believe he's 100%. But
it would.
I mean, that's what we would believe, but is he really? Like, you see him throw the ball. Is he really? Like, we don't think he is, but according to reports, he's 100%. He's not on the injury report again this week, coming off the bye. But like Jamal alluded to, you can just tell from throws he's missing. I mean, there was a out route against Seattle that's not necessarily an easy throw, but an NFL throw, and a talent like Justin Herbert hits 10 out of 10 times, and he just short hopped it to Mike. Like, I think it was either Williams or Everett on just a little 10-yard out route. And so throws like that, you're seeing the one where he forced one over the middle and the triple coverage. So there's a lot of mental stuff that I don't know, just if he doesn't trust his body fully. So he's forcing things incorrectly. So yeah, there's a lot of things attributing to it. But I think to answer your question, as far as we know, he's 100%. But is he? I guess we'll see again on Sunday.
So then what, and Ryan, we'll stick with you on this one as well. So then tell me about Austin Ekeler, and has he become the most important member of this offense given, some of the short yardage attempts and how they're using him and Justin's limitations, and of course the injury to Keenan Allen and now Mike Williams? Like, do we expect this to be the Austin Ekeler show on Sunday, or are they going to get support from some other guys? And if so, who might they be?
Yeah, no matter what, Justin Herbert's still the most important player on the offense. They're not going to go very far.
Of course,
if he's
that's
playing
a given. Yeah.
Like himself. But after that, it's absolutely Austin Ekeler. You hit the nail on the head. No Mike Williams this week. Keenan Allen. There's like two different reports whether he like re-injured his hamstring in the bye week or just it's not improving like they hope. There's like conflicting stuff out there, but basically he's at risk of not going yet again. Obviously Jalen Guyton, who was their deep guy, got injured early in the season, out for the year. So when you look at the receiving core, you're looking at Josh Palmer, second-year kid, and then walk-ons essentially after that. And then you have Gerald Everett, you have Donald Parham, and then Austin Ekeler. So Austin Ekeler absolutely is the focal point of the offense. Joshua Kelley, who really emerged as RB2 and has had a really fine season, he's out for another 4 weeks or so, nursing an injury. So they have their running back, Isaiah Spiller, who had 1 carry last week. And then they have Larry Roundtree, who Sony Michel, who they signed off free agency this season. And he's kind of been their secondary back as well. So without getting too long-winded, yes, it's going to be Austin Ekeler. He's going to have to, I think, catch the ball 8+ times in this one. He's going to have to run it 15+ times. So you're looking at 20, 22, 25+ touches, and they're going to have to find some good efficiency there and keep him healthy as well. And if they want any chance in this one, because they just, unfortunately, it's the NFL, next man up. They just don't have the talent at the other positions in order to overcome a lot of what's going on. So it's going to have to be the Austin Ekeler show.
I mean, he's certainly capable of handling it. He's currently 9th right now in total offensive yards, 737, but played 1 less game than a lot of the guys ahead of him on that list. So, I mean, that does show you the versatility. But what about the offensive line? Because played pretty well by and large all year long, at least in terms of sack numbers. Obviously, watching him game in and game out, you're going to have a better idea of pressures and hurries and things like that than, an outsider might. But lately it looks like it's trending maybe in the wrong direction. Is that because we're just kind of like other teams are getting a little bit more of a script on some of these reserve offensive linemen, Jamal, and now that they've got kind of a game plan on how to attack them, it's getting easier? Are they just regressing more back to the mean and kind of becoming more the league average player that you originally expected them to be? Like, what has been the recent issue, or has there been a recent issue, and everything still is expected to be fine for this offensive line?
Well, I think what we're seeing in terms of, and I think you are very astute in pointing out some regression, but I don't think the regression is necessarily attributed to hat on hat and an inability to maybe, sort of be very good in pass or run blocking situations. I think they've held up actually pretty decently when you sort of take out the small sample size of week over week. I think where they're struggling is in blitzes. And I think the blitzes are a direct result of not having enough respect for the guys on the outside. And so I think people are starting to really understand that we can crowd some of these receivers, play more bump and run coverage. They're not going to be able to get separation because of that lack of talent from wide receiver 2 onwards at this particular stage. We can get more clever, take more chances with our blitzes because Herbert isn't really sort of connecting with those receivers. They don't have the talent to get the separation. And B, because of his own injuries, he's more sort of looking towards the check down. So even if we whiff on a blitz, what's the worst that's going to happen? We give up 8 yards on a play. I mean, the risk reward ratio there is just so much in favor of stacking the box more and bringing more exotic pressures that's really where we're seeing the offensive line struggle a little bit to sort of pick up where that pressure is coming from. And the one thing I'll double click on, Will, in terms of the offensive approach and the offensive line approach to this game, with the emphasis being on Ekeler, and I think the other key member of this team is going to be Gerald Everett offensively for this game. But it really falls into the Falcons' hands because of the lack of offensive variety and the offensive explosiveness. It's going to take a long time for the Chargers to move the ball down the field. And I think both teams are going to be in that game where when they have the ball, they're going to possess the ball for a long period of time, which means that there's going to be a fewer number of possessions in the game, which really falls into the Falcons' lap in terms of how they want to play. And Arthur Smith can run the ball even more for a longer period of time in the game because there's going to be fewer possessions and the probability of falling behind by more than one score early in the game is so low that they can really commit to running, and then go and play action deep with Mariota and doing some exotic things. So the game is really setting up nicely for the Falcons, both in terms of pace, in terms of style, and in terms of being at home.
Jamal, you're a hell of a salesman, man. Like, I am so hyped for this game right now. Let's go. Is Sunday here yet? Can it get here fast enough? I cannot wait for this.
I don't think our Chargers listeners are buying what he's putting down, but hey, I'm glad Atlanta is.
Now my car is going to get egged in LA now after this show.
I mean, that is the nightmare scenario, right? Like, that's kind of the vice grip for the Chargers as it gets into that doomsday spiral where, the Falcons are running the ball well. They're controlling time of possession. Maybe one, a missed throw by Herbert gets picked and all of a sudden the Falcons are back. And, yes, that's like the slow Python grip for this game. But, Ryan, the last time we talked, it was before the Rams game in week 2. And the Falcons had dominated the Saints for 3 quarters, gave up a big, fourth quarter collapse, lost the game. And we didn't really know what to make of the Falcons. Then the Falcons went and played probably their second worst game, in my opinion, of the season against the Rams. But they've since then kind of become the same team, a better version, even though they haven't had Cordarrelle Patterson and, the injuries are starting to tick up. But since then, since the last time we talked, has your opinion changed on this team? Or, I guess, how do you view them coming into this matchup as opposed to the first time we talked?
Yeah, well, first off, what a fun game that was last week against Carolina. I know you probably wouldn't have felt the same had Carolina pulled it off and ended up winning in overtime. But since Atlanta got the win, we can just look and say, yeah, that was a fun game.
Yeah, you can. I would have thought Justin Herbert would be the one making a 62-yard throw, like right on the dime at the end to tie it up. But hey, PJ Walker, step right up.
Yeah. Does PJ Walker, is that the throw of the year so far?
I mean, it was so good. Right? It was so good. I've watched it so many times.
Well, that's what Mahomes tweeted out. Remember, Mahomes said that was the best throw of the year of the NFL, hands down. It's not even a question. So if it's good enough for Pat Mahomes, it should be good enough for all the fans.
Yeah, I think so. No, that was fun, but no, I mean, to answer your question, I think this, and I think you kind of set the question up with the answer. The fact that this team, I don't think, is any different than what we already knew or expected, but now they've owned that and have really kind of like what we've said about the Chargers, but the opposite. The Chargers, we don't really know because they haven't owned an identity and they're inconsistent in that. We know they have talent on certain sides, but I think the Falcons, from what I've seen, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know the ins and outs of the Falcons, which we're flip here in a second. We'll start asking you some questions.
Yeah.
But I think that they've owned who they are. Arthur Smith has been very clear since being hired. Like, this is what we're going to do on offense. This is who we're going to be. They've owned that. They've basically used Marcus Mariota in a very smart and strategic way. And, obviously I'm not saying he hasn't lost them games or hasn't done this or that, or hasn't played poorly other times here or there. But I think overall they've really figured out their mantra and been able to, play into that. And they've done it to some success. And obviously being first in the division helps having their division not play very well, but,
yes,
but they are first in the division. And so, to answer your question, I think they really have found who they are, which obviously is a run first football team. And the defense has shown glimmers of improvement. Obviously last week, not as much, giving up quite a few points to Carolina, who hadn't done anything offensively for quite a few weeks, but it's a division game. You never know what can happen in those. And the Panthers, I think, have some pride after trading their best player, firing their coach. And so you never can count one of those teams out. But the Falcons, weathered the storm and stuck their identity, and, they're first in the division.
They are. And you can never discount the like coaching change bounce, right? It's a little bit like on Wall Street, they get a new CEO, the stocks are going to go up for a little bit because everybody's just like, all right, change. Here we go. That's got to be good, right? So, all right, let's flip it around. You guys, any Falcons related questions for me? What do you want to know?
Well, I will start. And I know we talked a little bit when we were talking Rams Falcons earlier in the season, but this is, different team, different matchup later on, obviously. But out here in LA, I know I mentioned it then, but we love Drake London, was a great Trojan out here, 8th overall pick for you guys. I know statistically it hasn't been blown off the page, but I think a lot of that obviously is the offense, the style, the scheme, the utilization. But I'd rather you answer. What's been the thoughts on Drake London? How does he compare in the offense with the likes of Kyle Pitts? And what kind of threat do you think he poses to this Chargers secondary, who's going to be missing a JC Jackson and whatnot, has kind of banged up at safety as well? So just overall thoughts on London, Pitts, and the kind of passing game of this Falcons team.
Yeah. Well, the passing game is not abundant, but I think that's very clear. Drake London specifically, you mentioned the volume's not been there, but on a per play basis, like it's very apparent that the Falcons hit on the number 8 pick. I mean, he's a really good player and he does the little things very well. There was a play in the game against Carolina where he's kind of running a dig route, sees Marcus Mariota getting out of the pocket, rolling back out to the left. So he just puts his foot in the ground, but he kind of overruns. Like he almost acts like he doesn't see what's happening. And I think that was to kind of lull his defender to sleep in man coverage. And then on a dime, flies back, catches back up to Mariota, makes a catch on the sideline. So it's like he has a savviness about him that I don't think a lot of rookies, although more rookies, I think nowadays coming into the league are showing this. If the volume was there a little bit more, I think that he would be talked about as one of the best rookies in the league. But that has done nothing to hamper my excitement for what he will be. And frankly, Kyle Pitts falls into this category as well. There just has not been enough volume to make them the star players that when you watch them, you clearly see that they will become. I mean, Drake London leads this team right now with 346 receiving yards, and we're going into week 9, and the Falcons have not had a bye week. So that's a minuscule amount of receiving yards for your number 1 wide receiver to have. So it's been like that. It's not going to be the star of the show. That being said, like I mentioned earlier, like they're going to run the ball to get people into these cover 3, cover 1 looks. And then when they do pass, they're looking to take the roof off. Like they're looking for these chunk plays. I think Arthur Smith would love to go 10 of 13 throwing the ball for 215 yards because 8 of those probably went for 20 plus yards and get 1 touchdown in there. That's probably a great day for his passing game. So that's kind of, I think, what you're going to see now. Los Angeles' secondary scares the hell out of me. Like they are so good. I love Derwin James with all my heart. Nasir Adderley has played well this season. I think Asante Samuel, makes his plays when he needs to. So I'm really worried about the secondary, which is why I would be shocked, honestly, if the Falcons throw the ball more than 10 times in this game. As long as everything goes according to plan, it's going to look like a Georgia Tech offense, circa Paul Johnson out there.
Man, I mean, it's such a not a. I guess you could use insult or whatever in today's NFL. But that's got to be such a good feeling if you can win a football game running, throwing the ball 10 times and you just smash.
It would make Bill Belichick smile.
Yeah, exactly. So it was that game last year. What was it? It was Patriots Bills, right? When the Patriots beat the Bills by throwing the ball like 6 times.
Yeah,
was that last year's game.
Yeah. I think so. And I mean, usually, right? You see those numbers, you're like, were they playing in 4 feet of snow? But yeah, the Falcons are just like, nah, we're trailing by 2 touchdowns every single quarter, and we decided to run the ball 36 times in this game.
Yeah,
it does.
I love it.
So, Will, question for you on what is the sense of Mariota this year? Obviously, he had that incredible line against the Niners. What was it, 12 of 13? And, was essentially flawless in that game and in that upset victory. Is the thinking that he is just sort of the stopgap for the quarterback of the future, perhaps in this year's draft or next year's draft? And what has he done well that surprised you this year? And what has he not done well, truthfully? And what are your expectations for him, not just against the Chargers this week, but second half of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are... So we've always known what Marcus Mariota is, right? For some reason here in Atlanta, like it keeps surprising everybody week to week. because he'll have a game like the San Francisco game where he was good, but again, he didn't have to do much. To me, some of his best plays, which all season the best plays have been the ones that he makes with his legs, either to buy time to then find somebody else, or breaking off a 30-yard run like he did against Carolina in overtime to essentially move them into field goal range to win the game. But his big flaw this year has been big turnovers at kind of the worst possible time. He threw the interception that then should have lost the game for Atlanta. And yeah, it was an okay read and all that stuff. And he got hit right as soon as he was letting the ball go. So it came short and all of that. But it's more the decision making. Like, is that the right time? Yes, it's the look. It's there. But like, bad things have happened when he's tried stuff like that late in games, whether it's a fumble, whether it's a costly turnover. But by and large, he's played well. Now, I do think his kind of lot in life is to be this bridge quarterback. I think kind of what we saw happen in Tennessee was that he is good enough. He does, I think, a lot of the intellectual part of the game at a very high level. And I think his decision-making kind of in crisis moments is actually really, really great. And he does make some really good throws at times. It's just that part of his game is too inconsistent. And I don't know if he is as consistent overall as somebody who can be a long-term starter. So I think that's why you saw Tennessee, because they couldn't have that big passing game that you kind of need to have at some point to threaten teams enough. And they realized that with Ryan Tannehill, they were just more of a complete offense. I think that's going to be kind of the same case here in Atlanta. But what Marcus Mariota has given them so far this year is a very complex running game that is multifaceted and multidimensional. And that has allowed Atlanta to really kind of put defenses in some really creative binds, which gives them an advantage that they may not have going toe-to-toe talent-wise. So that is kind of what he's been for Atlanta, is a little bit of an X factor schematically, if not talent-wise. And for that reason, I'm really curious to see what they do with quarterback this offseason, but I would be surprised if they say, all right, Marcus Mariota, you led us to a wild card berth. Here's a 3-year contract extension. I don't foresee that being the case.
And just to kind of double down on that, if that's the case, is a guy like Desmond Ridder have potential to be the future, or is it they're back in the draft, kind of maybe trading up, or depending where they finish up, to get that truly talented guy that can really add a potency to Arthur Smith's offense that just unleashes a lot that maybe he hasn't even been able to show?
I mean, that's a big question here. It for as much as the Falcons are 4-4 and in first place in the NFC South, it's a topic on our show every Sunday. Is all right, Desmond Ridder, like, people are still clamoring for him, even though the Falcons are winning and doing better. And we all thought that when they got through their first 7 games, which was brutal, that Marcus Mariota would essentially serve as the captain, go down with the ship, and then we'd turn it over to our new captain on the little life raft, who was going to head towards the bright, glorious future that Atlanta wanted, and that would be Desmond Ridder. Well, they're 4-4, and they actually have the easier part of their schedule in front of them. So kind of results-wise, it doesn't look like a change is forthcoming. Therefore, is Desmond Ridder ready to surpass Marcus Mariota outright and even on a winning team say, hey, this good's too good to ignore? Or does this play out like a little bit of an Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes situation? Not saying that Desmond Ridder is going to be Patrick Mahomes, but that was a case where your veteran kind of gave your rookie the luxury of sitting for a whole year. I don't know if the Falcons are going to secure a first-round bye to let Desmond Ridder kind of start a game for free at the end of the year and see what he can do. It's really impossible to answer the quarterback question for the future without seeing what the piece labeled Desmond Ridder looks like. So that makes this conversation really hard. And it's just kind of why you've got to trust the team. And to be clear, I think the team has earned a lot of fans' trust with how they've done things so far. So if they avoid quarterback next offseason, all right, they think Desmond Ridder's it. But right now, we don't know, the media or the fan base, kind of enough, I think, to give an answer one way or the other.
Will, in a weird sense, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, of course, but is this almost like the worst possible season the Falcons could have? Because they're not a Super Bowl contender, and they're not bad enough to try out their starting quarterback, and they're not going to be bad enough to be high enough in the draft to go get a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud or what have you. So in a way, they're kind of in no man's land. How do you feel about that? And what's kind of the temperature with the fans?
I don't think that they're necessarily in no man's land, because this year just wasn't expected to amount to anything. And so when your expectations are already that the season is going to be poor from an actual, like, the product on the field, so what does our JV team look like kind of deal? Like, you sit in the high school bleachers, you're like, these guys suck. Let's go see what the 8th grade team looks like, and if there's any hope on the horizon. That is, an enticing mentality, I think, to take, because you can safeguard yourself from, emotional hurt. Like, that's what all fans just want to avoid is, I don't want to get my hopes up because I don't want to be crushed. And trust us, in Atlanta, like, we get that. But
Chargers
from a culture standpoint, I mean, yeah, there's heartbreak everywhere, right? If you're a sports fan, you felt it. But what we're seeing is really, I think, an evolution of culture. And that does matter. I think learning how to win is something that is maybe even something that I've underrated previously. But how many times do you see the same teams getting first round picks? I mean, how many first round picks does Jacksonville need? How many, like, top 5 first round picks? Like the Carolina Panthers, they're talented, but they can't win. And we're seeing teams all around the league that are kind of on paper talented, and then you've got a team like Atlanta that should have gone 2-15 by, some predictions, who are finding ways to win these games because, yes, I believe they have a lot of schematic advantages because of their coaching, but they do a lot of the little things right. They give maximum effort all the time. There is kind of buy-in from the talented guys on the team, like a Kyle Pitts, like a Drake London, where they say, we're going to run block 30 times in a game. It's not going to be fun. We're going to get criticized for fantasy points and all these, but, like, we're winning football games. And so I think that is something that can't be overstated. The quarterback stuff can be figured out. I think you're going to start see more teams that want to put the team together and then figure out the quarterback kind of at the end as your last missing piece, as opposed to the Russell Wilson, man, we hit on a quarterback in the 3rd round. We really think we have something here. Dak Prescott, same thing. Like, we're all in on their rookie contract, and you start with the quarterback, and then you have so many teams trying to find quarterbacks left and right in the draft. I think we're going to start seeing the opposite happen, and I think Atlanta's a good case model for why that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one or two more from us probably, then we can wrap this thing up. But
yeah,
you talk to us about Dean Pease, defensive coordinator. Obviously the talk is about Arthur Smith. Anytime you have an offensive head coach, that's kind of the focal point and the focus of analysis and chatter. Dean Pease, obviously long tenured NFL coach, a lot of history, a lot of teams. What's he done to kind of stabilize Arthur Smith maybe as a first time? I know this is his 2nd year, but first time head coach. And B, what has he, do you think, done well offensively or not well? I know they're not necessarily a juggernaut on defense. I think I said defense. But what has he been able to do for this defense? And how do you see this defense matching up against the Chargers offense, which we talked about extensively earlier in the show, but now we'll flip it on the Falcons side and kind of what Dean Pease and this defensive unit can do to slow down Herbert and company.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mentioned, them against the blitz, the Chargers offensive line, kind of that being a little bit of a weak link. The Falcons haven't blitzed much, in terms of kind of the percentage of their overall plays defensively, and probably not as much as Dean Pease would like, candidly. Their talent level in the secondary and kind of in pass coverage, I think, necessitates them doing a lot of simulated pressures where you look like you're sending 5 guys, 6 guys before the snap, and then 4 of them ultimately come. So you're not actually sending anybody on a blitz, but where those 4 are coming from changes every play. That's kind of what they've been doing because they want, 7 guys back in coverage against some of these teams that they don't match up well necessarily talent-wise. Now, given the fact that the Chargers are banged up at wide receiver, I don't know if that's going to free them like it has some other teams apparently to maybe say, all right, we don't need 7 guys back here. We can play man coverage. We're going to bring both our linebackers through the A-gap. I think Dean Pease certainly has that in him. So from a matchup standpoint, like, that's probably the thing I'm going to look for first. From just the way that the unit has gelled, what are their strengths and weaknesses? it's the linebackers are relied on, as all linebackers kind of in the NFL for the run defense. And I think that Michael Walker, who is in his third year, kind of his first year as a starter, has done a really good job on the inside. Rashawn Evans has great plays and then kind of has some lapses, but he is a veteran who is usually in the right place more than not. Lorenzo Carter, I think, has been an unsung hero in his first year here in Atlanta. He had a pick six last week against the Panthers right before halftime that really swung this game for Atlanta at a crucial time, and they obviously don't win without it. In the secondary, their young players have played admirably. Cornell Armstrong, who was promoted from the practice squad and then has been forced into a starting role because of AJ Terrell and Casey Hayward Jr.'s injury. But he's done well in that role. The Alford, Darren Hall, also little known guys, but they all play cohesively. And this is another thing for Dean Pease's defense is they're very intricate. They look complex to the naked eye, but the Falcons have done such a good job with the details and everybody being on point. You very rarely see just a total breakdown or in a 3-by-1 set, the three receivers getting clean freely because two guys went and covered one guy. You don't see that stuff. So I think he teaches it really well. It's just, again, the least expensive defensive unit in the NFL is in Atlanta. And I think we see that at times.
Will, just to jump on that, let me sort of frame a question this way. If the Falcons pull off the upset on Sunday, who is the defensive player that has to have an incredible game and essentially is kind of defensive player of the game in your mind?
Yeah, and I love that you brought up this question because it gives me a chance to talk about Arnold Ebiketie, who is their second-round pick out of Penn State. He really, if you look at pure sacks, you're not going to think that this guy kind of amounts to much of anything or is really any threat so far. But his quarterback hurries, his pressure rate is right up there with Aiden Hutchinson, right up there among the very top rookies in the league. He's watching him on film. I'm constantly surprised that he does not have like 6 sacks already. And I kind of think once he gets his first one, they're going to come in bunches because he is always just a hair behind every quarterback. And, maybe Justin Herbert getting the ball out quickly, like we may see something similar this week. But when I'm looking at, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to ask about the offensive line and the pass rush and the sacks kind of increasing lately. It's because I had Arnold Ebiketie in mind because I feel like he's getting there. And as a rookie, sometimes all it takes is that first one. He's a little versatile. They'll get him to drop back. He's part of that simulated pressure where sometimes he's coming, sometimes he's not. But he's surprised me, frankly, and I watched a lot of his tape at Penn State coming into the draft with how he's played because he's played much better than anything I saw from him on tape. And I truly believe that, in the next couple of years, he'll be somebody that when it's Sunday Night Football, Chris Collinsworth, I don't even know. They've changed so many announcer pairings so many times on these stations. I don't even know if he's there anymore, but they're going to be like, man, this Arnold Ebiketie guy, watch out for him. I really think that that's going to be the case.
Those are always such fun stories because I love seeing the guys that are lesser known that, through coaching, through hard work, through effort, really start making a name for themselves and are guys that are circled as, hey, this is a matchup nightmare, a guy that really you need to really, hone in on, and whether it's you chipping or bringing a tight end over or keeping a running back and set. And it's not just, you mentioned, not just the flashy Aiden Hutchinson second overall pick. So that'll certainly be one for us to watch. And I'm curious if Joe Lombardi and company out not in Los Angeles, but for the Chargers, will keep an extra tight end or whatnot to kind of neutralize that. So, well, let's do this. Let's get to some predictions and then we can wrap up. Obviously, Will introed the show, but Will McFadden does the Believe in Saints show. We're really excited to be, or Believe in Saints, Believe in Falcons. You don't want to put that on your show. I say that. Oh, man.
Don't lump us in there, man.
Yeah. The Falcons show. So what do you think? We can go around the horn. I'll go last. Since I'm posing the question, we can start with Will, or we'll start with Will. What do you think? Falcons pull it off? They get the win?
I mean, obviously, I'm going to be the biased one. But yeah, I think at home, I think the run game, that combination, the volatility. The big thing that concerns me here is coming off of the bye week, because I do think Brandon Staley is the type of coach where he'll come up with something the Falcons have never seen before. But I think that's going to be on the offensive side of the ball, and I think that's the wrong place for him to be focusing that energy a little bit. It just seems like they're fascinated with that. So I'm going to say the Falcons low scoring again, kind of like you guys mentioned it. I like Atlanta like 27-21 in this game.
All right. Jamal?
Yeah, I think it's going to be possessions are going to be at a premium. I think the game is going to be very much played in an Atlanta tempo. I think it's going to be very close. I think the kicking game is going to play a big role in this game moving forward. I think the Chargers will find a way to make one or two plays with Herbert, with Ekeler, with Everett in the fourth quarter. And I like the Chargers to win 20-16, but it's going to be close and it's going to be played on Atlanta's terms. And the question is, is Herbert great enough to be able to yank one out in the fourth quarter? I believe he is. And I think it'll be 20-16 in a very competitive, compelling game.
Yeah, I think I'll go off that too. And now we're going to sound biased and homerish.
Yeah, I'm so surprised we're all picking the podcast that we're on.
Well, these teams, obviously are very similar in record and where they obviously very different style of teams, but kind of the hurdles they've had to jump to get where they are. Chargers are a little more banged up on terms of star players. The big key for me, and Jamal kind of hit it a little bit when talking about Justin Herbert, but if you look at Herbert's career, he's had some definite inconsistencies throughout his career. And as good as he is, there's definitely been games that the Chargers have lost because of Herbert. A lot of fans don't like to admit it, but he's had some bad games. Typically, he doesn't have those bad games in 2-game stretches. Well, he had him in 2-game stretches against the Broncos and the Seahawks. They happened to win the Broncos game in overtime. They got blown out against the Seahawks. But now they've had a bye to kind of fix some of those. He gets another week healthier. I cannot see Herbert having a stretch of 3 games in a row of very poor performances. The Chargers are a 3-point favorite, according to Bet Online. I think it's going to be real close to that line. I'll go with them winning 20-17, kind of like how Jamal said, just because of maybe some late game heroics from Herbert. But I think the Falcons probably jump out early, as did the last 2 teams the Chargers played. 3 teams, they fell behind early and to kind of come back to make it interesting. But I think they're able to come back and overcome and get the win down in Atlanta. But it should be a fun game, probably one that not a lot of people are circling, but I think it's one that we'll certainly be really excited to watch.
The Falcons have a tendency to be in some very exciting games down the stretch. It may not always be pretty, but it's exciting.
Which is, that's what you wanted as an NFL product. So we'll love it. Well, Will, thanks for having us on. Thanks for coming on with us. This was a blast in this little crossover Falcons-Chargers show.
Of course, guys. And, anytime we play an LA team, you'll be my first call. So I appreciate you guys coming on as well.